So welcome, Barton. Thank you so much for spending time not only with me, but really sharing with our entire community on a day of the year when many of us are deep in prayer and reflection, thinking about our lives. One of the great privileges that I have as a rabbi is walking alongside people during their most difficult moments. And what I've observed is that sometimes those greatest challenges are also the sources of our greatest wisdom. And in particular, the experience of healing has taught me so much, both by, again, witnessing and walking alongside others in our community, and from my own experience. When I think back on my own life, I believe that all human beings are here to heal. And we all, if we live long enough, meet suffering of different kinds, and it's just a very human experience. But it takes an extra measure of courage and vulnerability and kindness for you to share with us. So let me just start by thanking you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Absolute pleasure.
So if you don't mind just beginning a little bit and sharing with us your own experience with illness, with healing, and you can approach that, it's a long journey, I know, but you can approach that in any way you think would be
Sure.
instructive.
So I've been struggling with Crohn's disease for over 30 years. It struck me in my early 20s when I was in university, and at a time when I should have been, out with friends and partying and having fun, I was uber focused on the bathroom, because that's really was the most important thing. I was going to the bathroom 15 to 20 times a day at that time. Plus, I was in a pretty intense undergraduate chemistry program. So I was in a co-op program, so I was in between work terms and classroom. So I really didn't have a break, and I was constantly in pain, running to the bathroom. I was losing weight, tremendously, in and out of the hospital. For a few years, until I decided in 1989 to have surgery, to fix the problem, and that was my first surgery that I had back then, and it was absolutely necessary. I was under 100 pounds at the time. I couldn't eat anything. It was just a really tough situation. And over the years, I've had many other surgeries on my abdomen to help alleviate the Crohn's that's in there. And I was honestly trying to think about how many surgeries I've had.
You lose count at a certain point.
You kind of do, but I know it's somewhere between 8 and 10 surgeries. And so, when I was looking at the questions and kind of reflecting on what is healing versus what is curing, to be cured. For me, it's more of getting past, the situation that I was in and kind of looking forward to the future. So I think at that time in my life, people always say, "Oh, you're so strong. We look up to you. I could never have done it." And I mean, I take that with a grain of salt, because unless you're actually experiencing something, you don't really know how you're going to react. And so when I was in my 20s, it was more of, I've got my whole life ahead of me.
Yeah.
So that's that focus. And now I've got my family. So that's my focus. And so I've gone through a lot of difficulties from the standpoint of pain and suffering. And I wish I could say it's over. It's not. After all those surgeries, I've developed a lot of scar tissue or adhesions, and it requires me to go into the hospital a few times a year just to let the bowels rest, and they gave me pain medication until it sorts out itself, and then I'm back out. And again, I wish I could say that was it, but a couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and had surgery to remove my prostate. So it's one of those things where you kind of reflect and you start feeling sorry for yourself, and I think that's okay, to feel sorry for yourself and be mad. I've learned that.
Yeah.
And so it's been a long journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you saying, sometimes people share their suffering with me and they feel badly, that they feel sorry for themselves. And my response is like, oh my gosh, that's just such a beautiful, natural form of compassion arising for yourself. This is hard. This is really hard. So to be able to say to yourself, yeah, this is terrible.
Yeah, I think, at first, why me? People have it worse than I do. When people would say that to me, especially when I was younger, it was like, well, that really doesn't affect me right now. Right now, it's me that's suffering, and I know it may be a bit selfish to think that others have it a lot worse than I do. But for this moment, anyways, I'm going to feel sorry for myself and be mad at the world.
Yeah.
And as I grew older, I realized that's also part of the healing, I think, is anytime you keep things inside and you don't share it or express it, I think you're just building up all that anxiety, and it could be a bad thing, and it could lead to further illness. So I'm all about expressing it in any way that you want, whether it's talking to somebody, whether it's yelling, whatever it is, just express it.
And sometimes even giving myself permission to feel, knowing that there's no easy solution to what's happening right now, actually allows that energy and that feeling to dissipate on some level and shift.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I love that we say as Jewish people is refuah shlema, which means wishing you a complete healing, which is different than wishing you a cure. We may also wish that. But for example, I know with Crohn's, you haven't been given, at least at this point, some sort of final cure. So when you think about sort of the prospect of a life in which there will be continuous attending needed to help you function and feel good.
Right.
How does that change the way you think about curing and healing? How does that change the way you think about finding the hope, as you said, to keep you sustained?
For me, it's about management. And so, one of the things that I wouldn't say holds me back, but always is in the back of my mind, I do a lot of travel for work, and these, trips to the hospital that I've mentioned, it's always in the back of my mind, where am I going to be in the world when something could potentially happen? Because there's no, and it's not necessarily related to Crohn's, it's more of these bowel obstructions that I can get as a result of these surgeries. And so, the thing that I'm always conscious of is, look, let's just get through this period. And then we'll worry about things afterwards. I'll admit it. I mean, I talk to God a lot and say, just, get me through this trip. And then I'll say, get me through the next trip. It's important. Or if I have real important meetings, the last thing I'm going to want is to end up in the hospital. And, I think, part of that reason is I feel, right or wrong, that it's a sense of weakness. Okay, so whether it was applying for a job or whether it was in going to an important meeting or on a business trip, if I fell ill, how are others going to look at that and look at me and judge me? And I still, to this day, haven't gotten past that. It's still always on my mind. So it's less of what am I going to do if I get sick there, as opposed to what are others going to think of me and of the situation if that does occur. So I am absolutely never thinking about a cure for anything. The healing for me is more short term and managing the chunk of time.
Yeah. So I'm incredibly struck by really the strength that is required, because one way to deal with the fact that you have this always kind of in the background as something that could happen would be to sort of construct a life in which you no longer traveled for business, or you didn't do these kinds of meetings, or you became much more insular, and yet you've persevered to fulfill your purpose and the mission of the company that you've built, and just to fulfill all of your potential in this way. And that requires a tremendous amount of strength, actually, in contradistinction to your inner fears around how will this be perceived as weakness. I see that as just incredibly strong. So tell me a little bit about where you find strength.
And so, I look at two periods of my life, one when I was younger and one when where I am today. And so when I was younger, it was really through my friends. My parents were, and brother were certainly there and supportive, but it was really my friends, I think, that I would say loved me unconditionally, which means, when I was in the hospital, they would just show up every single day. And they were busy, and they had things going on, young 20s, didn't want to be hanging out with a guy in a hospital who really didn't want them there. Because when I'm ill, I really don't want a lot of people around, but it takes a strong person who is a supporter to be okay with not having a conversation and just sitting there with you and offering that kind of support. So my friends gave me a lot of support when I was growing up, but there's no doubt that pales in comparison to my wife, Mare, who unconditionally loves me for who I am. She met me when I was sick. I'd had my first surgery already, but she already knew everything about me and the potential down the road as well. She had her issues too, but and I think we found strength in that together. But it's something to be said when you never have to think twice about expressing yourself on how you feel with someone else. So no reservations, no hesitation at all, even if it's the slightest twinge I may feel in my stomach and I know she may get worried. I feel it's important for me that I tell her how I'm feeling, because she gives me that support that's either, do you want to go to the hospital now? Should we wait? It's up to you. And it's that support, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, that just allows me to be accepting of the situation and will get me through it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a blessing. We love you, Mare. But what a blessing to have somebody in your life who can offer you that kind of steady and unconditional presence. And you're reminding us also that, in what you shared about your friends, even friends who were willing to be there and not have a conversation, even for the friends who knew that you didn't even particularly want them there, just their being there was a source of strength.
Yeah, and so growing up, and then when I started having a family and my kids and trying to tell them and what was going on, and it was always difficult for me to tell people, especially when you meet new people. The one thing I've learned is never assume, that somebody just because they look some way on the surface isn't dealing with something, and never judge anybody, because you never know what people are going through. But I was still very reserved in terms of, how do you come out and just say, hi, nice to meet you. Oh, by the way, here's my illness. And it was just became very difficult. So what I decided to do was for two reasons. One, so I decided to write a book, and two reasons for it. One was to kind of just put it out there and say, hey, this is me, this is who I am, and hopefully offer others who may be suffering, whether it's Crohn's or another disease, hey, look, I persevered. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination, the image of health, but I'm still successful and have lived, a good life that I'm proud of and happy. And it's also a way to give something to my kids and their kids and their kids, so they'll know who I am and always know who their father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and so on was. And it'll live on. And it was more for me like leaving a legacy. Yeah,
it felt, I read your book, and I would encourage anyone else to read it as well. Will you remind everyone that the title?
It's called No Obstructions.
And I was so taken in, and I really felt like when I closed the book with some tears, that it was like an ethical will in some way. Like you really left them with just such a beautiful, and not hiding the hard parts by any stretch, of what it means to just live with courage, to live with disappointment, to live with loss, and still find joy and strength and all the things that you've wanted in your life.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a 2-year journey, which included, if you recall in the book, I kept a journal back in the late 80s, early 90s, and just copied that pretty much verbatim. And I try not to apologize for some of the things that I write, because I was an angry young man, and I look back and say, boy, I really said some awful things and had some awful thoughts. But again, I think it just comes from a place of me kind of expressing, how I feel. And, that was one of the, things that I felt I couldn't do with my parents, right? Is because their generation, it's almost as if they felt that if I was expressing myself negatively, that it was a negative reflection on them.
Yeah.
And so I was very reserved when it came to expressing my feelings with them, and so that's when I would express it to my friends.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that I appreciated in connection with that is you really give all of us permission to release that sense of shame that can come with illness. I too have Crohn's and have celiac, and I remember as a teenager, again, I in college, my college roommate would sit by the bathroom doors to give me privacy, and she'd tell everybody on the hallway that it was out of order. And I just felt such a profound sense of shame, and that too led to just deep pain. And so the courage that you have shown in just putting it out there in a book for anyone to read, but your family is, I think, also a kind of intergenerational healing, because our grandparents and parents were given very different messages about what was okay to share.
And you see, even we're having this conversation, and I still haven't, revealed, right, what's in the book, right, which is, that I have an ileostomy bag. And, it's one of those things where, for whatever reason, again, because I'm different and, I have this appendage, so to speak, that it's embarrassing, and it still is to this day. I don't have control over things like gas, and I could be in a meeting, I could be with friends and family, and a noise can come out, and it's just one of those things that there's just nothing you can do about it, and you just have to live with it.
Yeah. And you're also reminding us that there are so many things that we cannot see, that we don't immediately know about people, and in all likelihood, everybody is dealing with something. And in some ways, it's easier when we can see it on somebody to extend compassion, but it's a reminder to us to assume that everybody has something.
Yeah, when you see somebody, for example, with an artificial limb, that's obvious. You say, oh, that person has an artificial limb. When it's under clothes or it's something even mental, right? Mental illness has such a negative stigma in our society.
Still.
And it's, still to this day. And it's a chemical imbalance. It's an illness. And people still look at it quite negatively.
Yeah. So true. So Barton, when you think, over this sort of whole part of your life, is there one piece of wisdom connected to your own experience with healing that you'd really love to share with our community?
Yeah, I would say it, and it's okay, to feel bad about yourself. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be mad at God. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay, to say, why me? It's always going to get better. We know that. And I always look at it as, okay, today I'm sick, but I know in a couple of days I'm going to feel different, like a new person. And, the day I woke up from my first surgery after being in pain for a few years, basically nonstop, and I had surgery pain, but I no longer had the Crohn's pain. That to me was like a completely new, I was like reborn at that point. And I think that's the way we should look at it, is when you're ill, you're dealing with it, and when you get better, it's almost like a rebirth and you're starting over again.
I love that. What a beautiful way to end our time together. This season of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is a reminder to us in a sort of big communal way that rebirth is something that we do over and over and over again. So may you continue to have many, many, many rebirths into health and strength and healing. Thank you so much for spending time and sharing your life with us.
Thank you, Rabbi Jenny.
Welcome, Robin. Oh my gosh, this is such a gift to sit with you and to provide an opportunity for you to share a little bit on this theme of healing with our entire community on a day when many of us are really deep in the work of our own spiritual healing and considering the year that has passed and the year that is ahead. You know, we would love to think that COVID is completely in the rearview mirror. It's not, and that's not the only kind of healing. You are a person who has certainly met your own challenges in life and has been so thoughtful and considerate and reflective about healing, but also has had your hand in and had the opportunity to observe by virtue of your many, many years working as within the military as both a military spouse and in business management with the military community. You've really been able to watch healing unfold in all kinds of ways. So welcome. Thank you for being here, for sharing your many, many gifts with our community, but this one in particular. So when you think about your own encounter with healing or what you've been able to observe over the course of a lifetime, are there any moments that stand out or any specific experiences that really immediately come to the fore?
Yes. During this pandemic, I personally had an experience where I became ill. In the midst of everything going on and dedicating myself to my work and my family care, suddenly I became ill. And so an unplanned surgery in the midst of the pandemic really caught me by surprise and off guard. And I had to turn in and apply some of those same things that I brought to bear in relationships, personal and professional, and apply them to self. Just when I thought the pandemic was plenty, then I had that to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think what that meant for me at that time was to focus and concentrate that I, like everyone else, had just as much of an opportunity to have my own personal journey of healing and recovery from something as others who were in my circle, professional and private.
So many of us who are used to being caretakers and prefer to be on the caretaking side, the ones who are extending care and compassion, it can be extra difficult to be in the recipient role. And it sounds like some of those very things that you have helped make space for and encourage in others were the things that were helpful to you in your own healing. Are there a couple that come to mind?
Yes, some of the things were learning to listen to others who were offering help the same way that I would encourage others to listen when I was extending help, right?
Yeah.
So a mark of leadership and a mark of just great personal relationships is being able to offer help and also accept help.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's coming from people who are bringing things to mind that you might not have considered for yourself. And that can be a very vulnerable time, but also a very strengthening time.
Oh, I love how you phrase that. And it actually reminded me, I don't know which miscarriage it was that we had experienced, probably the last. And we had congregants have these beautiful offerings of wanting to bring food, to do something. And I remember looking at Eric and saying, no, I can do this. I've got to get back to work and the routine, and I can do this. And he said, no, this is also part of leadership, part of spiritual leadership. Yes. And of course, it was really hard for me to open myself up to that kind of vulnerability. But he was absolutely right. And we teach also in how we allow ourselves to be recipients and inspire others to give.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. And it can be also such a developmental opportunity when others look to you as a resource and others look to you as a source of strength, to see that opportunity for you to have that experience, allow yourself to be vulnerable, and yet still show strength in the midst of that. We should never underestimate our opportunity to inspire others when we're going through a challenging time.
It is so true. The idea that strength and softness and openness are somehow incompatible it's the opposite. I've learned that. They really can go hand in hand. That's the kind of person and the leader I want to be. So I appreciate that so much. Robin, when you think about the difference, in Judaism we talk a lot about healing, refuah, rather than curing. We like cures, of course, we all do. But when you think about the difference, what comes up for you? What does that mean for you?
That's a great question. And for me, I think of something being passive as opposed to something being active.
Okay.
A cure, right, is something that you seek. You embrace it with enthusiasm. You look after it as something that you seek because it could be permanent or an ultimate resolution. Healing, though, when I think of it, healing for me, I go back to a root of health. And so healing and health require active participation. It is something you do. It requires you to be involved and committed. And so rather than receiving and being passive to seek a cure that will do something for you, I look to healing and health as active engagement, something I'm doing for myself or for others. And that, in my mind and in my experience, is longer lived, so much more valuable, and so much more worthy.
I appreciate that. There's the way you're describing it, it's like, cure almost is one component of healing. But the healing is a much broader umbrella that describes a quality of well-being, of health, of wholeness. And I also appreciate you mentioning that, there's this kind of engagement that's required. We may need to go out and seek a cure. There's a kind of pursuit involved with that. But healing is not just a passive sort of process. It's one that demands our active participation and partnership.
Yes, absolutely.
When you look at the way you've watched, being in the military, there's all kinds of wounds that soldiers develop on the outside that we can see, and soldiers and their families who develop wounds that we can't see. When you've watched how the folks in your community have healed, what do you think are the things that are most helpful? I think a lot of times when we have people in our community who have deep wounds of all kinds and who have many needs, sometimes we're not really sure what to do, what would actually be helpful, supportive. So what are those things you've seen? And of course, I'm sure it varies by individual, but what are some of the things that you've really observed make a meaningful difference in someone else's healing?
I've seen, experienced, and observed the benefit of being present, simply being present and listening to someone else's story. There is a lot that one can say and share, but what really matters most is using both of your ears and listening so that that person has that safe, comfortable space to simply be. And in some cases, there is silence that is appropriate. Some questions and some conversations don't have answers. But what's most important is the opportunity to share and connect and to still be seen as valued and worthy of that investment of time and sharing of yourselves. So much of the encounters that I've experienced and observed, it touches more than the person, that service member. It touches the family. It touches their peers and their colleagues. It's a culture that's impacted by that. And I've learned and seen over time, being present, being available, and just listening, huge, huge impact. And ultimately, let's remember, there's no timeline, there's no clock.
Yeah.
And so it's really okay if we have to revisit something, sit with it, and be present.
So you're reminding me that when I was a rabbinical student, I did most of my clinical training in a hospital setting. And I was very intent upon being a good chaplain. And I thought initially, this was something that I had to unlearn encounter after encounter, but I thought that being a good chaplain would be knowing the right words to say. Having some wise words, which I definitely did not have in my 20s. Wise words, wise answers, beautiful pieces of Torah to take from our tradition, to apply to a pastoral moment. And what I hear you saying is just such a deep and profound reminder. What I had to unlearn and relearn over and over and over again. What a gift it is just to be listened to.
Yes.
And that so much of life, including our suffering, doesn't have answers. There's no way to tie it up in a bow. If we're fortunate, over the course of a lifetime, we can construct some meaning, we can wrest some blessings, and build kind of a story that itself is healing. But that too doesn't always happen.
That's true. There are some things that are part of our evolution. It becomes part of our way of being, and it informs some of the choices that we make and the relationships that we build, and some that we may need to step away from.
That's right.
And that's okay.
And that process, there, as you said, like there's no date at which these things end. And if we're, fortunate enough, we get to revisit them with loving, supportive people around us who are willing to stay connected. I love what you said about that. Sometimes I know folks who are struggling in a long-term way. Again, that my inner fixer, so desperately wants to see progress, whatever that would mean.
Right.
But just that idea that staying connected,
Right,
is itself, it's actually healing in both directions.
it absolutely is. It's hugely healing. Sometimes we see by listening the mirror image of things that we might not have been ready to face. And while we're processing and being there for someone else, or even reflecting back, choosing words and responses carefully, we wind up healing ourselves in an effort to heal and help someone else.
Amen, for sure.
Yes.
So Robin, where do you find your strength? Where do you, what practices, what words, what ideas or beliefs help you sort of dip into that reservoir of strength when you need it?
Meditation helps hugely, and self-reflection. I have found that some of my most calm comes from simply sitting quietly, reflecting, and davening. Prayer is amazing, and I particularly like one that says, "Thank you, Hashem, for creating me as I am."
Yes.
And just sitting with that and accepting it.
Yeah.
Self-reflection helps me so much. And when necessary, I reach out to someone for a touch point. This is how I'm seeing it. What are you seeing?
Yeah.
Am I on the right track here? Do you have any insight? With trusted people.
Yeah.
And it may not always be the same person, but I really focus on where am I, and if I'm feeling stuck, I found that prayer and meditation helps so much.
Wow, that's awesome. There's a beautiful word that is used from the Garden of Eden story at the very beginning of the Torah, and God calls out to Adam when he's hiding and ashamed and says, Ayeka, and it literally means, where are you? But it's a very rare and specific grammatical way of saying, where are you? It's a rhetorical question. God knows where Adam is.
Right.
But what God is really asking, the rabbis teach us, is, where are you? And that invites, a kind of self-reflectiveness that I hear you talking about. And sometimes we can do that just with ourselves. And sometimes we do that best with trusted people.
Yes.
Who can help reflect, offer different viewpoints. When you meditate, what does that look like for you? It can look like all kinds of things. I talk about this all the time. So I'm curious what it looks like, it feels like for you.
Meditating for me looks like typically indoor, and it is scent driven. So aromas are important to me, typically silence, and it looks like focusing on my breathing, really sharpening that focus and drawing inward. And when I can, just deep breathing. And I have this wonderful place in my office, windows from floor to ceiling. And so I see green trees and growth, and I just focus there and stay in that moment.
Beautiful.
Thoughts come and go, I let them go.
Yes.
I just sit with it.
Beautiful. And as we say in the mindfulness world, simple, not easy.
True.
So,
right.
Or at least it can be.
Yes.
But that's so helpful to inspire us with ideas for how you find your own strength through stillness and through really shifting your attention from being a human doing to a human being.
Yes.
So I have one final question, which is to invite you to share any last piece of wisdom that you've learned about healing, something that you want to pass on to your kids and grandkids, and we as your blessed community can learn from as well.
For healing, I'll circle back to us talking about cure versus healing, and to just remember the active role that we have in our own health and well-being. Let's acknowledge that it may be different for each individual person, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Doing that self-work and that self-awareness, right? So when I'm reflecting on those things that I can do to be healthy and whole and healed, to remember that it's a process.
Yeah.
It's okay if I didn't get it right. I can always come back and try again. But to be that active participant and to invite others in into those safe spaces when the need arises.
Amazing. May we both and all of us who are gathered together today, whether we're in person or experiencing this learning remotely, may we all continue to be active participants in our own healing, pulling in the good souls that we need to help us on our way. Thank you so much, Robin. Wishing you a good, healthy, whole new year.
And to you as well. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Elyse. What a joy to sit with you. It's always a gift to spend time with you. And now we have this moment to not only share with each other, but with our whole community.
Yes.
So a big thank you for your willingness to share with us on a day when we're all really deep in a reflective mode, thinking about our lives, about the fragility of what it means to be a human being, not only a human doing, but a human being.
Yes.
And thinking about how we want to move into the year ahead, please God, with strength. And I believe so deeply that all of us are here to heal.
Yes.
Physical things, if we live long enough, we will all encounter that, but also sometimes wounds that we can't see, but that are just part of, again, being humans, living in families.
Yes.
Moving through generational trauma and just the experience of suffering that we all encounter. So you come to us as someone who's really walked a journey, of course, not only of your own healing, but as a healer and as part of a team of healers.
Yes.
So if you don't mind just beginning by talking about any aspect of healing. Again, you could talk about your own experience, personal experience with healing, or what it's like to be a healer, to be a witness to healing. Just any way you want to enter into that topic.
Okay. Healing is, to me, a process. You can heal from a medical condition, you can heal from an emotional situation. Healing is an ongoing process. People talk about being cured versus healing. To me, being cured is fixing the problem and never having that issue or concern again. Whereas healing, it's an ongoing attempt to be complete again. If you're healing, in a sense, that means that something is broken. So that's how I view it.
That's beautiful. In fact, what we say to somebody when we wish them healing is refuah shlema, a whole or a complete healing. Shlema comes from that same word of shalom, which we usually associate with peace or with the greeting of hello, goodbye, but really comes from the word shalom, which means whole.
Yes. Yes.
And I know that for myself, that if I were to describe what healing feels like, that process inside of myself, it feels like wholeness.
Yes.
That all of my parts, many of which are broken, somehow I can kind of hold them all together.
Yes.
In some way.
Yes.
So we've talked about this before in some ways, but you were really on the front lines when 9/11 happened. And now you find yourself, and you've driven many an ambulance,
Yes.
which I am in awe of. And now you find yourself alongside people who are transitioning into
Yes.
whatever's next.
Yes.
So how do you lean into your strength? How do you find the strength that you need to deliver care, but also just deliver presence?
Yes. So people talk about their journey, and if it's okay, I'll just kind of go back to my childhood, because as I reflect, it really started as a young child. So my father sold monuments, Wenig monuments on the Lower East Side, and he used to take me to the cemeteries on Sunday. And I used to say, no, Dad, you're walking on the graves. You know, I was always worried about him not being respectful. So it started way back then. He always used to tell jokes, you know, why are there bars around the cemetery? Because everybody's dying to get in, you know. So I have always been around off-color humor around death and dying. When I became of age, I became a paramedic. I wanted to save the world and, excitement and all the guts and glory kind of thing. I eventually went to nursing school. I found myself in the intensive care unit where people are critically ill and a lot of times family mourning at the bedside and working 12-hour shifts. You really get to know more about the person and the family dynamics. And that's essentially, I felt like I was helping the families more so than curing the sick and dying in the hospital setting. I eventually went back to school and became a nurse practitioner, initially working in the gastrointestinal situation as a consult, and I found myself morally distressed when we were artificially keeping older patients who were in the dying process. And we were artificially keeping them alive by putting in, say, a feeding tube or artificial hydration with IV tubes. And it just didn't feel right or natural to me. The palliative care team at that time was starting up at Wake Med Hospital, and the physician that was leading the team said to me, "You would be really good at palliative care." So I ended up joining that team, and it's really been an amazing journey, and I think I found my niche. So going back to saving everybody, and really I feel like I've come full circle, and now I am helping patients who are on their end-of-life journey, or patients who are critically ill, or patients who have a chronic disease, really helping patients and their families with their own journeys. Sometimes we can't save everybody, and patients' loved ones are the people that you're treating, because they're the ones that are carrying that burden of sometimes very difficult decisions that they have to make.
Absolutely.
And they carry that for the rest of their lives.
Yes.
So it's not only about the patient, but it's also about family members, loved ones, friends. So.
I love how you're bringing our attention also to the fact that when we think about wholeness and healing, that it's, none of us live in a vacuum. Very few, if any of us, heal alone. We heal in connection with others. And when one part of a relationship or one person in a family is experiencing suffering and difficulty, that impacts everybody around. And so you really, I love that you found palliative care and palliative care found you. Because it's, to me, it's a specialty that really understands the difference between curing and healing. You mentioned the word saving, and sort of associating saving with that earlier hope and aspiration, and sort of suggesting that you look at things very differently now. But as a religious leader, as a person who's sort of guided by my spirituality from the core, the word saving is actually not just about sort of the physical self. There's a kind of saving that happens when a person can die in a way that allows them or their family to be whole. So you're still saving people.
In a different way,
In a different way. In a different way. So I'm curious, as you've watched people move through their own healing and their family's healing in all kinds of ways, what have you observed as being particularly wise and helpful and supportive? And how has that inspired you to think about being a healer in a more expansive way?
Good question. I would have to say that I am very grateful for the interdisciplinary team that we have. A lot of palliative care teams don't have that. I have a group of social workers that help out, not only patients and their families, but our team as well.
Yes. The healers need healers.
Yes, it can be extremely emotionally draining. And so I'm grateful for them. They keep us on track. I wanted to expand my role of helping patients and their families, and I recently took a death doula class, which is, a lot of people don't know what it is.
Yeah, tell us.
It's really being along for the whole journey. Folks equate palliative care with hospice, and it's really two different pathways. Just to explain, palliative care is a support system in place that helps with symptom management. It helps communicating amongst the care team and planning. Whereas hospice, a patient has a terminal diagnosis, so it's a very different pathway. A death doula is with someone who's on that journey, but a death doula can help patients and their families with all of those things. It incorporates palliative care and hospice. The death doula doesn't provide the medical care. That would be the role of the medical provider on the hospice team. But a death doula does things such as legacy work. So if somebody wants to do a journal, you talk about how you want your end-of-life journey to be, what you want it to look like, helping them come to terms with their mortality and family, and helping all of them. Like you said, it's you're treating the whole community essentially.
And I love that word doula. I mean, it's making me think about birth doulas and birth plans. I remember.
Which we know how well that goes.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm laughing with lots of air quotes. But isn't that the truth of all of this? You know, that it is, you know, as you said, man plans, God laughs. And yet here we are trying to plan as best we can to put what matters most to us, to live that out as fully as we can with the gift of the days that we're given. And to surround ourselves, hopefully, with the people that we love and that are going to support us. And to have somebody like a death doula who is not afraid to talk about.
Very difficult conversations. Not easy at all.
Yeah, and it can be excruciating for family members to hold space and just give language to the fact that their loved one is dying, that we're all only here for a relatively short time.
That's right.
And you come in your role to help make space for that. And hold everyone together for those difficult conversations. So as you think about your own healing, is there one thing that, you know, one piece of wisdom that you regularly remind yourself of, that you want to pass on to your own girls, your adult children, about what it is to heal and what it is to meet our suffering in life, and how to grow from that?
I just have to say therapy is an amazing tool. I think even in the best circumstances, parents try their best to do everything that's right. It's not always right for the moment. We do the best with the tools that we have to raise our children, provide for them, and give them more than what we had, and support them through their own journeys because they're individuals as well. So I think in this world with social media and the turmoil that's going on around us, whether it be in politics or world wars or just everyday stuff that we get bombarded with on the news, I think it's important, and I try and stress this to my girls, to be grounded, to practice gratitude, to be thankful every day, to try and be the best person they can be that day. You're going to have good days and bad days, especially hormonal women. And then that's okay. You know, it's you can't have a good day every day. You have to have bad days, otherwise you won't know that
or
appreciate the good days. You know, so just to allow themselves that grace period to say, it's okay, I had a bad day. I'm going to get a good night's sleep. Try telling teenagers that. Going to get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow's a new day. And just start over and try and make tomorrow a better day than the days past.
So beautiful. And, you know, to be present with today is what I hear you also saying. And today might mean giving ourselves a giant dose of self-compassion because it's hard, either because of what's arising from within ourselves or the choices that we've made, or because of what life has dealt us. And then those days that are spectacular and filled with blessing, to honor that also and just enjoy it and savor it while we can.
Absolutely.
Elyse, thank you so much for taking time to share with us, being so open, not only with me always, but with our whole community. Wishing you a good, healing year of health and wholeness for you and your whole family.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course.